Okay, thank you very much for this very nice introduction. And I'm really enjoying being here. This is, I think, the first time I can talk to a conference on human ethology. And obviously, I am the sort of the cuckoo's egg here, not talking so much about humans, but there will be humans, don't worry, in some of these slides and researches. But I also wasn't sure about what to talk. First of all, because obviously I was thinking that everyone knows a lot about this relationship between a dog and a human. I used to ask how many people have dogs, and probably I don't want to bore you with this question now, so I would assume that generally it's 50% of the people in any room that you find people that have at least a dog, maybe some even two. So the dogs actually are higher a little bit than 50%. And on the other hand, I was talking to Ferenc just from the railway station back, and he told me that Friederike Range last year in Paris talked about dogs and wolves to you. So after this discussion, I removed all the wolf slides from my presentation and put in some more, because obviously Friederike has more to say, and because she's working still on wolves when we stopped working on wolves. So I put in rather some more human slides. And also, I was just before 10 minutes ago, I was thinking really that, I think it's quite an obvious topic to talk about this, so you might be, know about this, you are quite bored with that, and so on. And then, 10 minutes ago, I walked around, this is not an advertisement, the Royal Society bookshelf there, and I found this paper, actually in this issue. This is issued on the humans as a model for understanding biological fundamentals. And there is this paper by R. Billy and Lotham. I didn't read it, so just from the abstract. And they say they want to propose a functional evolutionary approach, okay, to the study of human-like mechanisms in animals. Okay, that's what they want to do. And then in the abstract they write, our goal is not to elevate animals. I don't understand this elevation either, but okay, that's what they. It's an apostrophe, but anyway. So it's strange in an evolutionary journal. Okay. So our goal is not to elevate animals, but rather to find the minimal set of mechanistic principles that may explain advanced, and this is also an apostrophe, advanced cognitive abilities in humans. And I just reading it, well, I had a few minutes to go to the paper, actually to the references. I didn't find not a single reference to dog research, or to dog paper, dog behavior, which I would assume after 20 years of dog research and really being cited, not myself, but the group and many other people, it's a little bit strange. So I think I really feel I have a mission here to do, to convince you working on humans that, there are these dogs there, sometimes actually by your feet, and you should really consider them as a possible interesting research object. So that's the background, and I'm really starting the talk. For the official part, okay? So really there's the mission, but you have to, because actually during, I think it was yesterday, really I want to make, and this is the whole aim of the talk, because obviously it's a little bit of a review, a lot of people actually might know about our work, but what I really want to achieve here to have this message that how can dog behavior, the understanding of the dog-human relationship help people working in human fields to advance their knowledge, especially about humans, but also about dogs in parallel. So the central question for us was, what makes a dog a dog? And the observation that everybody knows is really that dogs have been very successful in getting into the human community. So, as I said, we are living with dogs together. You can't find a continent, an island on the earth where there are no dogs. Obviously, there are also usually humans in parallel there. And there was this answer to that question, that obviously they have a very different evolutionary origin. And you can see the last common ancestor had lived about 100 million years ago, and still they have become somehow able to make this transition from their own social and ecological environment to the human ecological environment. So for us, the critical questions are, what are those traits that made this transition possible? What kind of performance is associated with that kind of traits? And obviously, what is also interesting, what are the mechanisms behind these traits? Now, obviously, we have to focus, because if I mention dogs, there are many kinds of dogs around us, so we just have to focus to a specific group of dogs. So here is a dog. Dogs have very different types of relationships, but we are focusing with this, in this relationship, so where we have the dog and the owner. It's obviously important to stress, because even though we have lots of reviewers, they always ask when we are presenting something, okay, now on family dogs, well, what does it tell us about the wild dogs and the stray dogs and so on? So obviously it's not about them, it's a specific feature, a specific a dog that we are actually talking about. I won't bore you also with the story of domestication. It's just this figure is an evolution of many, many research papers from the last 20 years. I think is the best and not too complicated description what went on in the last, let's say, 30,000 years, where dogs departed from some kind of wolf-like animals, and you can also see this departure happened probably at several time points, maybe even in several locations. Obviously, there was a decrease in genetic variability that was also then reinforced or increased again to some extent by other hybridization events through this path. And now we have here some wolves left that we are still not being able to kill. And then we have obviously more dogs in the family that we are enjoying our life with. The other aspect which is really interesting, which is sort of goes in parallel, this quite dynamic change where these family dogs, and I call family dogs those dogs who are living with humans for their entire life, independently what they do or what they not do, because most family dogs actually they don't do anything, just feed and sleep. So apart from that, there are some other dogs that actually do something. So we used to have herding dogs, hunting dogs, and other type of dogs really who were helping people along making their living. But today we have also show dogs. They also help people to make a living, by the way. You can earn quite a lot of money if you have a good and nice dog. I don't say that this is very exciting for ethologists to do, but anyway, this exists also. We have also the beauty contest before, so just why, if you have this for humans, why you shouldn't have that for dogs. So we have also dogs who are sporting, doing real sports and winning games and so on, and obviously we have dogs who are helping humans in a different way, right? Previously. So this is again an issue which you can see that the dog-human interaction has a very broad applications in many sense. Now about the relationship. I think this is again interesting, and I will really quickly go through because I think a lot of people know about it. How we perceive this relationship with dogs, because this is something very special when two species live together in such a long time frame. So the classical approach was what James Serpo called Lupomorphism. So the idea is that the dog is joining to the human family. However, this action actually turns the human family in a wolf pack, which is basically fighting for their survival and actually increases their competition and so on. Now, if you had ever feed your dog with food, you can immediately imagine that you are not competing for that dog food, do you? So actually, and I think this is not the whole idea. You actually work a lot in your workplace to earn the money to buy the dog food. And this is what the dog actually is not doing. So actually this core competition idea, not to mentioning that wolf packs are also not competitive, but ethologists find out in the last 20 years, also tells you that probably this model and this approach is not the good, what really would help us to have some concepts. Then the other aspect, which also was actually in Hungary, popularized very much by my former professor, Vilmos Csányi, is what I named as babymorphism. And obviously the idea here is that the dog is a little baby-like animal or a little human. How you portray it depends on you. Basically this idea of a little human who has sort of human-like or childlike skills, and this is how we should treat the dog. Obviously, this metaphor has some advantages. Dog trainers very often use it when they have to explain how to work with the dog or how to be with the dog at home. And also it has long, even scientific backings. If you read some books of Darwin, there is this nice human-dog parallel already emerges as an interesting a new aspect, but also it has another origin from how we raise dogs or how dogs had to be raised in some communities. Here's a picture from Aborigine people. Actually, they really these are dingoes, by the way, so not real dogs in that sense, but basically these dingoes wouldn't survive without not the mothers, the milk of these mothers. But you have the modern versions of these, babymorphism also now obviously in many ways, and now you're getting is supported by the industry by producing these little nice doggy things, and you can buy them for a lot of dollars or euros, and then everybody is sort of happy apart from the dog who has to wear these things. Okay, now my idea was from the beginning, but I couldn't really, only in the last few years, form this, that maybe the traditional human saying, what is this, in many languages you have that the dog is the man's best friend, which is, by the way, politically not correct anymore, so we should say the dog is the human's best friend, is maybe what we have to take seriously. And then I was very lucky to find this definition of friendship by an ethologist who really could make, I think, a very nice definition, then could also apply, obviously not to friendship within humans or within other animals, but also maybe in an interspecific context. So according to this definition, friendship is an alliance that really provides a possibility of mutual interaction, and what I really find important in this is that the sharing is not really dependent on an immediate reciprocity. So you're not expecting from your friend to provide the benefit immediately or provide something in return. So I think this is a very important aspect of the friendship, and what comes with it, what kind of mechanisms are, at least in humans, where friendship was more or less investigated, and not so much actually in other animal species, is that friends can really form a very long-term attachment relationship. This relationship between friends can be asymmetric, so it's not always that friends are in all means the same, but there is a match in personality, by the way, which I totally forgot to write here, but we have also data for that. Then having a friendship and being attached still allows both parties to live an independent life. So it means that they are biologically fully mature and then can live without each other for some time. And they're obviously cooperative, and what is also important, the idea comes from De Waal here, that they are managing the relationship. So if something goes wrong, you want to repair the relationship, you put in some extra energy to get this relationship going again. And I think this is what is valid for a human friendship, and I think really in an objective ways might also describe dog-human relationship in a very nice way. And what I will tell you a little bit later, so just keep it in your mind for a moment, that really this might be a good way to portray what happens between humans and dogs. Okay. Another important thing, and this is actually refers back to the paper that I cited here, is that really the problem is here that we have an animal with a very different evolutionary history that is now living together with another animal, the human, who has a different evolutionary history. And I think the question is how they manage it. And again, we were looking, or I was looking for some theoretical backup to conceptualize this whole idea. So, in the psychology, you have this notion of social competence, which I really like because this is not a single trait, but it really brings together many traits that, according to that sort of definition, really allows the individuals to manage its life within the group, because that's obviously important for a group living animal, both for dogs and for humans. And obviously it allows you this management by obviously interacting in a very different ways. So there's not a one preferred way for all individuals, but depending on your hierarchy, your rank, your relationships, your relatives, whatever, you have to manage this relationship based on what is generally described as a social competence. And So obviously this is a description of social competence put together from different research papers, most on a theory, how you can conceptualize this. And I think this again is a very nice concept that you can apply for this dog-human relationship as a background, as a start, how you make more concrete research questions. And the questions of what are, again, what are those traits that contribute to the social competence in dogs that allows them to survive in a human social group. And again, what is important here, again, what I find additionally in a paper from Johnston, who is not, again, writing about the particular aspect of dog-human relationship, but just talking about cognition in general, how it can be understood, is that obviously social competence is very important in a relationship where the individual is able to participate in interaction. It wants to participate, whatever we understand by this want aspect now, the intention, but really in the dogs we have this understanding that they want to be the member of our group. And what is also important, that we humans regard them as potential participants. So we treat them as if they would be equal in some sense, or if they could understand what we are telling them, if we could cooperate with them. And obviously it also happens, but it's important that it's our intention to engage with them in our groups. So if this social competence model is useful, then the next step is actually more concrete. Now we have a list of traits. What you can also see here, this could be listed also for humans. So in many of the talks previously, we heard some aspects of these traits for the human. But obviously the question is now, well, whether these traits actually exist as a functional analogies, if you would like, in the case of a dog, and what is the mechanism behind this trait. So if you want to have it in a more graphical way, this is how you can imagine it. So here is we have a three-dimensional model for social competence in human. It's not so important. Basically, this is the human part, this is the dog part, and here are those traits in this three-dimensional space. Let's say C4 is attachment, just a label from a human psychology literature. And then the question is, okay, now if these two individuals are matching somehow in their competence, what kind of match do we find between the attachment skills in humans and attachment skills in dogs? So that is now, I think, an interesting approach to this whole issue, and I think that's why it's important. And obviously, to give you a summary, and also maybe a useful summary for your future research, I think this is why dog research is interesting from a human behavior perspective. So the one is that, yes, there's another species where you see a parallel social evolution in some traits that might be interesting for you. Obviously, this is the comparative approach, and if you do any evolutionary study, I think it's very important that you have this approach. And we don't have fossils, so we really have to work only with those living species that we have. And obviously, just sort of in the logic of that paper that I cited from, is that some of these evolutionary questions that might emerge in the humans, it could also be tested in dogs. And I think that's what I try to do in the rest of my time, to show you what are those possibilities, or how far now research has been advanced in that way. Okay, so basically from now on, what I would talk is to identify some of those functional analogies, and maybe in some cases I could show, or I try to show, what kind of methods there exist that might also show the mechanism. And very often in our lab, when we are talking about dog behavior in a loose way, so not really scientifically, and then we have this idea that dogs are very good in simulating human behavior. So they act as if they would understand what we are telling them. They act as if they would understand when they are cooperating with us and so on. So the idea would be that they are doing, to some extent, very similar, they are achieving a very similar performance, but obviously there are the limits to some extent. On the other hand, the question is how they do it. So what kind of mechanisms are there behind these performances, or how they are controlled by the dogs? And this is what I would like to show in some of these examples. So, and when I'm talking about a mechanism, obviously there are behavior mechanisms, and there are some neural mechanisms that we can now at least a little bit know about them. So the first, and I think the critical aspect, is when you are talking about dog-human relationship, which is a neutral term, I mean relationship in that sense, is the attachment. So this is what probably most people experience when they have a dog, even if they might not formulate it. They usually talk about a bond, but we are using here attachment based on the psychological description used by Bowlby, Ainsworth, and others. So basically the functional aspects of regulating the interaction in and especially in space and in the terms of social interaction. So I just skip this slide here, but I'd rather to show you this very simple model of attachment, and then you can see, and most people probably know that, so I don't want to go into detail, that the functional attachment is basically has these four functions. One is the proximity maintenance, so the two individuals, the two agents, or the dog and the human, or the mother and the baby, can regulate how close they are to each other. Then obviously the other is the secure base effect, that also is important to regulate the exploratory behavior, how they again go away and learn about environment, but obviously from time to time they spend time together in sort of safety to some extent. Then the safe haven effect, which is emerging when there's a danger, that the partner should provide some safety in that sense. And obviously what is also important in terms of having some evidence for attachment, if the two are separated for a long time, then what we are seeing is the separation distress or separation anxiety, depending how you view it, where really there's a specific behavior shown, usually some aspect of communication, when the baby is losing the mother, actually the mother is losing the baby, you see the same stress in the mother or so, and you can see both in dog owners and the dog, the two aspects of the separation. So, and obviously the next step is to show that dogs are really attached to their owner, or better, put it in a better way, there is an attachment relationship emerging between dogs and owners. And here we were using this just your pictures, you get you familiar with the setting. So basically you can use exactly the same method that were introduced by Mary Ainsworth with dogs. You can see the pictures are the same for dogs and owners. This is the so-called the same situation test, and you can see that we have, sorry for those who didn't know it, so I just go back. So you have the mother, the baby here, the owner and the dog here interacting. Then in the next slide, what you have a stranger coming into the room, and we observe how the stranger is reacting, how the baby is reacting to the stranger in the presence of the mother, how the dog is reacting to the stranger in the presence of the owner. And what you can also see is how now the mother is away, so she left, and how the child reacts to the presence of the stranger. Dog owner is gone, how the dog is reacting. So this is a series of tests that you can do, and there's an established methodology for this. Just a short video to show that actually, yeah, this is what's going on. So now this is the owner with the dog playing. This is the first short episode. This is not a very playful dog, not so much interested in that. Now the stranger's coming in, you can see the dog is actually is now changing the proximity to the owner, so it's actually going closer to the owner, then shows some approach by exploring the stranger. I choose an example that's really a little bit deviation from the norm, just to give you a better impression. Now, so you can see the strangers are usually quite friendly women in our case, and you can see how the dog is slowly exploring her and then engaging into interaction eventually. But this might also change in many dogs when their owners are leaving and they are alone. So this is the next episode. Now they play something, but then the owner will actually leave the room, and you won't see because I won't let you see it, but the dog will stop playing with the stranger from that particular time. So if you measure that sort of behavior, you can see that, for example, staying at the door, so showing some sort of distress behavior is very little when the owner is present, and it's much higher when the stranger is present. and playing activity is higher when the owner is present and lower when the stranger is present, and greeting behavior, how active the dogs are greeting the person who is coming in. Obviously, owners are greeted more enthusiastically than strangers. And this is the only slide where I have wolves, because in this sense, wolves are easy to compare. So this is the experiment where we did exactly the same test with socialized wolves, and what you see is basically no difference between owners and strangers. So I don't go into detail, but the idea here is that although the wolves were socialized at the same level as dogs, you still not get the same attachment-like behavior that is quite pronounced in dogs. Another aspect is here when this again a sort of a well-known paradigm that we are using in the dog research is the how much dogs rely on gestures, communicative gestures used by humans. And this is just again to give you the impressions how these experiments are run. This we comparing children with dogs in this case. So the experiment is very simple. Everybody can do it at home. So the experimenter using different pointing gestures for the dog, and they are making a choice between two buckets, and in some cases they are more successful than in others, and then you can do exactly the same experiment with babies of different ages, and they may show the same behavior, they make the choice. So after all these experiments, it's quite easy. You have the two species, and then you can compare them, how they performed to various gestures. Now, if you are looking at the figures, what you can see here, this is Gabi Lakatos showing the different pointing gestures. First of all, 3-year-old children are actually, for them, all the gestures, the gestures make no difference. They are always close to perfect performance. The change occurs, or the difference is between, for 2-year-old children, then you can see that they are good with some of them, but they are actually quite bad when you are pointing like this. So basically, this is the gesture that 2-year-old children don't seem to follow, and this is also where the dogs have actually a problem. Dogs are obviously adults in this experiment, so for dogs, there will be no improvement in their life to that gesture, but in children you can see that from 2 to 3 they are improving a lot. And what is interesting in this gesture is that why probably also some of the audience were laughing, because for an adult human it's quite trivial that even if you are pointing like this, and obviously your elbow is going out to or pointing to this side, the direction that is indicated is on the other side, and you make this judgment based on the index finger. And I think this is on the pointing finger. And I think this is what is interesting. And this what this research has shown, that yes, dogs are quite good in relying on the pointing gesture, but what they never actually learn and never incorporate in the representation of the pointing gesture is this index finger thing. That for humans, after some age, becomes a very natural way to think about this gesture and actually focusing on where the finger is. So if I would do this, everybody would also know that what I want to do, not just thinking that, my hand has some problems, because, if I would like point like that. So this is, I think, again, how we can investigate and compare what kind of mechanisms are there for the humans. And obviously, I would argue, I don't know, that partly this difference from in children, what happens is because they also have an index finger, they also use it. So again, another type of representation comes into the mind, which actually helps or encourages or synergizes with the production and the perception, and makes this higher level of representation, if you like, in humans. Okay. Yes. Another interesting aspect is the communication part, where again I play you and there might be, if the sound is too loud, then please adjust it. But I'm not sure how loud it will be. This is a situation, actually we did it for totally different reason, and this is not from the original experiment, because this was just our image. So what you see here is a human who actually have a tape recorder covered so the dog can't see it, and we recorded a official woman cry, so it means it was really very emotional. Maybe you You can maybe hear the cry also, but also the whining of a dog. And the question for us was also the same, but we didn't finish this research, so I will actually refer them to different data, how dogs are reacting to emotional vocalization in humans. And this border collie is partly whining as well. He went to the owner, and what you see in here, that's also a person here. So some of these dogs, and these dogs also, this dog to some extent also contacted the experimenter, who was not really known for him before, and tried to engage the other human also in this situation. Let's put it this way. I don't want to over-interpret what's going on here. But the idea is basically that emotional vocalizations might have an effect on the dogs. It might be mutual, by the way, and actually we know that it is sort of mutual, but I try to show now you the dog aspect, and obviously this might be again interesting because this could really help enforce the attachment relationship and this sort of friendship aspect, because also, again, I'm not really familiar with the human literature, but I would assume that one very important role of friends is the emotional support. So not just the cooperation aspect that friends help, but also that are there when they are needed for emotional support. So, and obviously the research is very much at the beginning, but there are some behavior data that show that actually, and this is from psychologists in New Zealand, Young and Ruffman, so they found that when they are doing a sort of similar experiment, then, and they also made some other controls, so they were crying sound, babbling sound, and sort of white noise, then you can measure how much alertness is in the dog behavior, and also how much submissive behaviors they show, because maybe this whining sound elicits some submission. This is usually a sound produced in many other species also when the animal submits. So then you can see that although the differences are, so in this case to the crying they show less alert behavior to babbling and white noise, and they are showing more submission to crying and babbling. So this is again, this is different from from babbling, but not from the white noise. So there's a little bit of a complicated interpretation, but I think it would be better to do a different type of statistics, and maybe you get a different type of result. But the suggestion is that there's a specific way how the dogs are organizing the behavior. So it's more like they are doing more of the submissive behaviors and more of the alert behaviors in a specific combination when they are hearing the human cry. And then in their experiment, I should also add, there were no human, that was just by the loudspeaker played back. So then compared to the other two vocalizations, and also if they are measured the cortisol levels in this case, then what they found both in humans, because they also had a human part of this experiment, but also in dogs, that there was a difference only from the baseline, only in the case of the crying sound, and not in the case of babbling, and also not in the case of white noise. So basically the argument was that dogs were reacting by an enhanced stress to the sound compared to the other two vocalizations, and this is shows some parallels what they found also in humans. So there is some behavior evidence at least, and also some evidence that this is a parallel reaction in both species. So parallel to this research, we were sort of interested in, can we get any information about the neural representation of disability in dogs? And it took us 10 years to get to a sort of a solution by using a very interesting new methodology for us, at least, not for human researchers, where you can now do non-invasive experiments by investigating using different methods. One is the electroencephalography, and the other is the functional I would say magnetic resonant images, for short fMRI. This is too long for my speed talking. And I think we can't really use this because the dog head is full of muscles, and yes, so I should say we are using it, but it's not so well established for the dogs because the lots of muscles make this recording very complicated and difficult because it's based on electric activity of the brain. However, the functional magnetic resonance imaging, so the fMRI, is based on the change of blood oxygen concentration, and which relates to the activity of that particular brain part. So most brains, including dogs' brains, are good for that sort of method, and the idea was that we try to let or allow the dogs to take part in such experiments. Now, I think it's very important to stress why this is again interesting, because obviously we don't, as an ethologist, we don't want to do any experiment that is invasive, and usually neuro experiments are quite invasive when they are, and this is why they are done in other species. So, however, to understand really the evolution, not just of these functional analogies or even homologies in vertebrate or in mammalian evolution, I think it would be very important to have at least a few more species in this approach, not just the human. So this is just to referring you back to this phylogenetic tree, where you can see that this is where 200 million years ago dogs or even not dog-like, but the sum of those animals departed from the other line of animals, which includes rodents and primates. And I think this is a very interesting comparison, because basically it brings you back, theoretically at least, to those years how the mammalian brain looked like. Obviously the passes were different. You can see, just for comparison, this is a human brain, this is a dog brain here on the bottom. And so I think it would be really a good step forward. It opens a really new avenue to do this research, and again to give you just an idea what are all the problems that are obviously coming with that is partly from the size. So human neurobiologists who are used to big brains, I mean really 1 kilo something, then suddenly you are confronted with a very tiny one, which is a problem from technology to find those little active areas compared to the relatively large active areas in the human brain. But luckily technology is also improving, so we have a chance that actually we are getting there. Now, if you haven't been so unlucky to be in a scanner, for those, I can just show you the recording, how we are doing this with our dogs. So this is Marta. She's our ethologist and also dog trainer who invented this method of training that dogs are really happy and enjoying this experiment quite a lot, and participating in it. And it is Attila, our first neurobiologist, who was converted from being a human neurobiologist to a dog neurobiologist. And I think he's also now happy with this new job and so on. And they are both preparing now this dog for being scanned in one of our scanners in Budapest. And what you can really see, that the dog is voluntarily sort of participating. We don't feed them too much, especially not in scanner. Everything is done on a social reward basis, so that the dogs are participating because this is what been a sort of anthropomorphic interpretation, because they want to participate. This is so simple. They just want to being part of this whole excitement. And I think this is nice. Now, what is the critical thing, what I didn't mention before, is that if you want to determine a location in the brain, what you need is that location stays still. It should not move, okay? Now, the problem is, if it wants to move your head, then the scanner and the whole statistical apparatus that actually is now dealing with this data will not be able to pinpoint where exactly that activity was emerging. So we really have to make sure that the dogs are not moving. So this is just to tell you that without any actual... Yeah, thank you. I know I have time here. Okay. So without any actual fixing of the head of the dog, we were able to make the dogs not move more than 1 millimeter. 1 millimeter during 6 minutes can be sort of balanced by the software, so the software can manage that, but not more, not much more. And you can see that without actually, you don't know these people, so it's just a comparison. It's actually difficult to have dogs not moving for a long time. These are automatic recordings from the scanner, so the scanner is actually measuring how much the animal is moving, and if it's moving more than that, you basically have to repeat the experiment, or that's the safe to do it. So obviously you can make some statistical tricks, but that's again another issue. So this is how the dogs are, look like a hamburger in the scanner, and basically, but they can see here through the tunnel. They can usually in some experiments there's the trainer or the human there. In other experiments there's nobody there, and this is another small magnet on their head, but basically this is fixed, but whenever they want they can back, and then they could jump from the table, but that never happened actually. So that happens during the training sometimes, but never during a real experiment. So we only include dogs in experiments when we can make sure that they can lay there for 6 minutes, 5, 6 or 5, sometimes even longer. So in this particular experiment, what we wanted to find out is two things. One is that if dogs are listening to vocalizations, and vocalizations provided by humans or by dogs, whether they are representations in their brain, they are activated by either the species who is vocalizing, so whether it's a dog or a human. For human, it was known before that humans are sensitive, so whatever vocalizations they hear, so to all human vocalization, there's a specific brain area that is activated when in a human brain. So the question was whether dogs have a similar area in their brain. And in the second aspect of the same experiment was what we wanted to find out, whether there is some specific brain area that is activated in parallel with the emotional valence of the stimulus. So whether the stimulus is positive or negative, so not the stimulus, the vocalization is regarded as positive or negative, is there some area of the brain that is in any way changing its activity, let's put it this way. So the idea of all of these experiments is that the dog is lying in the scanner, then you have here the stimulus, so for example, human laughing for 8 seconds, then the scanner is silent because it's actually quite noisy. Even then it's a little bit of noise there, but it's not actively scanning. Then we have 2 seconds of scanning time. This is actually also nice from a biological perspective, because if the brain is listening to any stimulus, there is a time lag for the activity that you can measure a little bit after the stimulus is presented. So this is optimized by experts how you do it. And then after this 2 seconds of scanning time, then there is another vocalization presented, and then again we scan. And this goes on for 6 minutes. Basically we use the human type of arrangement. And just to give you impression what kind of sounds there were. Okay, so that were the one of a human sound. That was a dog sound. Okay. Okay, and then we have the last. This is also a dog sound. Okay, so just to summarize, I'm not a neurobiologist. I just really want to, for you to encourage you to think in this way, and it's very nice, because really the whole idea here is that the dog brain and the human brain, or the dog mind and the human brain, comes from the same environment. So in our case, it's really, we can expect that dogs and humans are hearing many of these sounds, vocalizations from each other. So the brain is actually exposed to the same environment, and therefore I think when we compare the brain, it's really a relatively valid comparison in that sense. So basically, it's complicated. I have to concentrate a lot. I don't want to go into the anatomic details, but the main message is more or less here. So one is what it's called the voice area. So the voice area is this area of the brain that is recognizing the species, whether it's a human or a dog. Now, for a human, we expect it. So this is the red part here. We expected from the literature, basically, and we found it, we could support these earlier data, that these red parts in the brain are really reflecting or activated always when there is any human vocalization, whether it's a cry or a laugh or a sneezing, whatever, then you get an activation of this area. What we don't see is anything what is blue in the human brain. This shows for us that there is no specific area in the human brain that would be activated to dog sounds, at least not on that part where we were looking. This is the primary auditory area, by the way. If you're looking at the dog brain, that we see that there's no red part indicating that there's no specific area for human vocalization in the dog brain. However, what we find is an area that is here, which is also by anatomists determined as an analog area for the primary auditory area in the dog brain, where the dogs seem to react to to vocalizations of their own species. So obviously from an ethological point of view, it's logical that species should have an area in their brain which is sensitive for species-specific vocalization. So it was good to find it, but it was not a huge revelation. The second aspect, which is most interesting, is about where the brain might evaluate emotionally loaded sounds. And here you should look at these yellow and the purple colors. And we found this in the human brain on both sides, more pronounced in one side, where, and what we also find is an overlap here, so the purple and the yellows areas are overlapping, and this is I think the interesting part, which tells us, at least this is our argument at the moment, that this is the specific area, or one of the specific areas where both human and dog vocalizations are evaluated. And this, the result was basically that the more positive the vocalization was, independently from the species, the more active that area were during that recording. So basically the human brain works using the same mechanisms for evaluating emotional content of the vocalizations independently of the species. And what was really interesting is this, the dog aspect is where we found a very similar area with also the overlaps between the two species. So dogs are having the same mechanism as the human, or at least we are not, obviously based on one experiment we can't say the same mechanism, but they have sort of an analog functioning in the both brains. And I think this is again important because this also shows that at least at the neural level that now we have some backing why dogs might be so sensitive to human vocalizations, not necessarily just to human vocalizations, but obviously that's another next experiment to find out, but at least to the human vocalization that again makes this human-dog communication very effective. And particularly the vocalization is a useful channel for communication because for that you need less experience. Generally in mammals, vocalizations are more conservative than, for example, visual signals. So learning about dog behavior based on visual signals actually is quite complicated, and we need a lot of experience by learning how the dog ears, tail, body is displaying signals, and because our body is displaying these signals quite in a different way. So I think vocal communication can really help to strengthen this relationship. And that's just summarized here. The last story that I want to share with you is also showing this parallel. And I want to share this with you because there is some discussion in the literature, especially in some cases people talk about that dogs and humans are co-evolving. And a paper in Science actually had this even in the title, you can see from Japanese researchers claiming that using some behavior evidence that I will describe in a minute, they were claiming that this is a proof for coevolution between humans and dogs. So actually what they did was a relatively simple but very interesting approach where they were allowing dogs and humans to engage socially. They also had wolves, socialized wolves, to engage socially with their owners. And then what they measured is, first of all, duration of gaze, how much they look at each other for how much time. And what you can also see here that we can measuring not just gazing, touching, and talking, and interestingly, well, for us not so interestingly, wolves are not gazing to the human, which is actually a well-known phenomenon, even in socialized wolves. Then dogs could be categorized as short-gaze dogs and long-gaze dogs, so dogs who, let's say, like to gaze, and other dogs who are not so much involved in that, but that you can really differ these two types of animals. And then what they did after this interaction, they measured the oxytocin concentration in urine. I know there is a lot of discussion about how good this measurement is and what is actually measured in urine or in the saliva, but that just put this apart. What they really found is that dogs can, especially those who are the sort of long gaze dogs who like to gaze into the at the face or the head of the humans, they showed a much higher concentration in the urine, and also the owners for those dogs showed a higher concentration in the urine compared to the dogs who had a short gaze and the wolves who have obviously also a short gaze, so the oxytocin was not so elevated in those two groups of animals. I just want to say that obviously this is there is much more to do. There's a lot of evidence that oxytocin has a role in social interaction, especially in that sort of affiliative interactions, both in humans and in dogs. But it's interesting that even in an interspecific relationship, you can find this effect. I would not say that this has anything to do with coevolution between the two species, but at least, again, it's a mechanism that strengthens this attachment, strengthens this bond, and helps dogs to get integrated in the human community. So, and just to summarize, basically here is that I think it's good to think about dogs in terms of a friendship relationship. There is a very nice approach which we call a behavior system approach, whereby you can identify those behavior traits that makes this friendship actually work. And I think really this underlying mechanisms like neural structures, hormonal systems, whether homologously or more in an analog way, can really detected that are playing part in that relationship between dogs and humans. And thank you very much for your attention.